I'm Andrew Schwartz, and you're listening to The Truth of the Matter, a podcast by CSIS where we break down the top policy issues of the day and talk with the people that can help us best understand what's really going on. To get to the truth of the matter about Israel's war to the north with Hezbollah in Lebanon, we have with us one of my favorite and most important guests on the truth of the matter, Mr. Norman Roule, who is a senior advisor at CSIS and served for 34 years in the Central Intelligence Agency, managing significant programs relating to the Middle East. Norm, welcome back to the podcast. This is absolutely fascinating to watch what's going on right now and very scary. Has the Israel-Hezbollah conflict reached an inflection point?
Thank you for having me. It's an extraordinary time, talking about a region that seems to have many extraordinary moments in recent years. The conflict has reached an inflection point. We're watching not just a significant escalation by the Israelis, but we're watching several different trains come into the station. The Israelis have allowed 11 months of diplomacy to take place without any impact. They've endured 8,000 rockets and missiles fired on their country. They've had tens of thousands of people, not only taken from their homes, but the communities and the businesses, the economies of those communities have been seriously damaged, if not destroyed, while they have waited for this diplomacy, which has dragged on without any sign of success to continue. They've had enough. The Prime Minister of Israel clearly stated they are moving north. It's an inflection point only in the scale and intensity of Israel's surgical targeting of Lebanese Hezbollah. At the same time, Israel's war goals remain the ending of attacks on its country and the return of its people. The destruction of Hezbollah is not a war aim. So it's an inflection point only in the scale and scope of the attacks to achieve what, in theory, Israel was entitled to since the beginning of the Gaza war, which is peace for its people.
Yeah, Norm, we'll talk about that a little bit more, and including the amount of displaced Israelis. I think it numbers something like 60,000 who the Israelis want to be able to return to their homes in the north of Israel. Let me ask you this. When it comes to these exploding pagers and other electronic devices, walkie-talkies, has the world ever seen anything like this before?
The answer is yes, but in different ways and in ways that people don't remember or don't really think about. The concept of placing an explosive in a consumer item, an item that has a civilian use, is a very, very old technique. In 1863, the Confederates in the United States invented a technique whereby they would disguise explosives as coal and then introduce this into the supply chain of the Union fleet. And it resulted, I believe, in 1864 in the sinking of at least one Union ship. In the First World War, the Germans, I believe, used the same coal explosive technique against the United States. In the Second World War, the British Special Operations Executive disguised multiple items that it used as explosives against the Germans. And MI5 in 1943 frustrated a Nazi attempt to kill Winston Churchill using an explosive bar of Peter's chocolate. If you move forward to our modern day, you routinely see news that the Russians and the Chinese have infiltrated our national cyber infrastructure with tools that, when they wish to use them, would shut down or damage our national architecture, say in time of war. Perhaps the most dramatic case that I think deserved a lot more attention than it got is the story that the Chinese who manufacture quality and cheap naval cranes, to the extent that it's about 60%, I believe, of the naval cranes used in the United States, incorporated cell phone technology, unbeknownst to the purchasers, in the control rooms of the cranes. Now, this is important because cranes are tied to the information infrastructure of a port. So a crane would be able to say what is being picked up from which ship to be put on which truck, perhaps to go to which location. So it would not only collect information, but it could drop that box, on the ship and damage the ship. I think what you're watching here is something that is a very old technique, very artistically applied, executed on a broad scale in a way that gets a lot of publicity, but it should underscore the importance of ensuring that our supply chain, particularly on our most sensitive technologies, is very carefully studied so that we can ensure that adversaries aren't using this capability against us.
Norm, you mentioned the scale, and I wonder, Israel's campaign against Hezbollah is underway. And as you said, the goal isn't to destroy Hezbollah completely. As they stated, they want to destroy Hamas completely. If that's not the goal, what is the goal? And do you expect things to intensify? And I guess finally, what is Israel's ability to end Hezbollah's attacks on Israel?
Well, the goal, as I said, is relatively simple. For months, Israel has endured 50 to 70 rocket and missile attacks on its territory from Lebanon, fired by Lebanese Hezbollah commandos, known as the Radwan units, located in areas they promised the UN in the UN Resolution 1701, where they would not exist. As a result of that firing, 60 to 65, I've heard as many as 80,000 people have been dispersed throughout Israel. And after 11 months of negotiations have been sincerely pushed by the United States, France, Germany, and others. These people have no foreseeable future in which they're returned to their homes unless something different is done to compel Lebanese Hezbollah to stop. So, what Israel is doing, in essence, is a campaign. And I think when you look at Israel's operations, it's only becoming clear now what was obvious to professionals or people who followed for a while, that this is a carefully thought out campaign that is meant to last for some time. It involves airstrikes, probably commando units. It involves likely cyber operations. It involves technical operations. It's primarily focused on Lebanon's south, where Hezbollah has established, in violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, weapons caches, tunnels, and command posts. It is also targeting Hezbollah officials in their most secure area, the Dahaya neighborhood of Beirut, as well as some elements of Hezbollah in Syria who are involved in attacks on Israel. I think this broader attack beyond the south is meant to convey to Nasrallah and his increasingly small circle of advisors, look, you have a choice. Stop your attacks on Israel and you live. If you don't, you're likely to die. So, of the 8-man Jihad Council, the military council that has managed Hezbollah affairs, which includes a number of murderers and terrorists, people have killed Americans, killed thousands of Syrians, and these people have been in their jobs for many years.
Killed American Marines in Beirut.
Killed American Marines. Israel has killed, I think, 7 of the 8 members, the Ali Karaki being the latest, and only Abu Ali al-Rida is the only surviving member of the council. It's a pretty small table around Nasrallah for his leadership gatherings. This said, I'm not sure yet that Israel has achieved a situation where Hezbollah is ready to stop. And for this reason, I think it's an inflection point because we're in a new type of conflict that, like Gaza, won't necessarily be as fast as Israel would like.
Norm, you mentioned Nasrallah. It sounds to me like Israel has taken out most of his top command. You said 7 of the 8 in the military command. Are they capable of getting Nasrallah? Do they want to get Nasrallah in your view? Or do they worry about a leadership vacuum if he is eliminated?
Well, I think you've asked several questions, and I think there are a number of different answers. Some are unknowable, perhaps even unknowable for the Israelis and the Lebanese Hezbollah themselves. The eradication of Hezbollah's leadership will leave the group open to a new generation of leaders. What does that mean? I think we should have some humility in talking about that. In a perfect world, it would mean that the Lebanese army would do what it's supposed to do, and that is restore security of its country and turn over the governance of that country to an elected leadership and not an Iranian proxy. But I'm not sure that's possible at that point. There's still thousands of Hezbollah armed gunmen running around. Regarding what the Israelis can and can't do, I think if you look at the nature of the strikes that have been conducted for a period of time. And I think we got to go back to April when the Israelis reportedly struck a building near, not at, the Iranian embassy, or next to the Iranian embassy in Damascus. The killing of Salah Aruri, the lead Hamas commander, in Dahaya, only 4/10 of a mile from where they killed Fadia Shukr. That demonstrates an extraordinary capacity for Israel to locate, follow, fix, and finish, as they say, Hezbollah's most secretive individuals. It's hard to believe that Nasrallah isn't part of that picture, but that's knowable probably only to a very small people within the Israeli intelligence hierarchy. Israel has also taken out thousands, tens of thousands of Hezbollah's missiles, missile launchers, and rockets, which demonstrates a significant capacity to understand where, again, secret caches are stored. What I saw was really interesting and telling on this is today the Israeli spokesman put forward a video that showed how Hezbollah has stored missiles ready to be fired and missile launchers ready to be rolled out inside of residences in the heart of Shia neighborhoods. And the fact that Israel would be able to identify these is just one more piece of evidence that Israel has developed, no doubt with the expenditure of significant resources, great and hard work over years, an extraordinary intelligence picture. So I would tend to say they do know where Nasrallah is. I would tend to say they're not trying to introduce chaos in a post-Nasrallah world. And at this point, and that's today while I'm speaking, and that could change based on events, their goal still remains return their people to a peaceful, secure area in their own country.
Norm, we've talked on this podcast before about the extensive tunnels that Hezbollah has. Their tunnels make Hamas's tunnels look like a schoolyard. Is that to their advantage in this situation, or are they really disrupted at this point?
Well, tunnels are useful for several reasons. Obviously, it's a place where leadership can hide, but you can't hide there forever, as 7 of the 8 members of the Jihad Council and about 20 leaders, commanders of the Radwan Commander Unit have discovered during a fatal meeting they held in Beirut. I think the tunnels are also obviously useful for weapons storage, missile launcher storage, and for hunkering down during airstrikes. That doesn't give an opportunity to conduct offensive action, but it does give an opportunity for the group to survive. Again, if you go back to what Israel is doing elsewhere, it's hard to believe that they don't have a good idea of where many of those tunnels are located. The challenge for Israel is how do you destroy these tunnels? And that answer is it's a 2,000-pound bomb, several of them. That's what these enormous explosives were designed to do, to bring down buildings and collapse tunnels where adversaries have located. This will increase the pressure on Israel to avoid civilian casualties because of the nature of the weapons. But I think we're watching a campaign where Israel is doing exactly that. It's trying to take out an adversary in a way that involves the fewest possible civilian casualties. I'm sorry for going on so long, but I want to just pull that thread just a little bit. Imagine without this intelligence, how Israel would conduct this campaign. We're talking World War II style attacks against cities. We're talking ground invasion. There really aren't many other ways to deal with this challenge. So it is clear that Israel is doing what it can to prevent civilian casualties. We should applaud that. We should resource that in a way that enables them to continue to do so. And if necessary, if it happens they do something wrong, we should find out why and make sure it doesn't happen again.
You know, Norm, you mentioned the 2,000-pound bombs. They're known as bunker busters. Biden administration threatened to withhold them from Israel when it comes to Hamas. Is that the same case with Hezbollah?
Not so far. And the Biden administration has limited, I think, its approach to the Israelis with calls for protection of Americans in Lebanon, with calls to de-escalate, with calls to avoid a broader conflict. Again, diplomacy is best handled in quiet, but the challenge or the disappointment, depending on how you want to look at it, with the Biden administration is that they're really not saying anything that gives Israel an option to return its people. And if you want to end this war, you've got to destroy those missile launchers before they unleash a catastrophic attack on Israel, which would compel the Israeli government to just escalate this attack farther and introduce more civilian casualties in Lebanon and in Israel.
So, yeah, that's a great point, Norman. Can you talk about what this current situation could mean for a larger conflict and a broader conflict throughout the region?
So, as you've heard me say perhaps before, I've always thought that there were four, and I still think that there are four guiding principles for this conflict since October 7th. And first is no actor in the region, the United States to Iran and everyone in between. No actor seeks to ignite a conventional conflict because what it would mean for its national, economic, and political priorities. The second part is that Iran and its proxies have very few reasons to stop their campaign that puts Israel and the United States in a diplomatic quagmire. But the nature of weapons, number three, is being involved are unprecedented. From the Houthis to the Iranians, and these are, ballistic missiles and drones. These are weapons of mass murder that are being used against civilian targets. And whatever criticism people have against Israel, it's a sad and unfortunate thing that all of Iran and proxy weapons are fired against civilians. In fact, many of the Hamas weapons were fired into areas with a large Palestinian population, and some of Hezbollah's attacks in recent days have been fired upon parts of Israel that are predominantly Arab. The challenge is number four, which is if one of these attacks produces a catastrophic success, a large number of civilian casualties, it could create a political environment where leaders are compelled to escalate. And that could push us towards this conventional conflict, which chances of that remain low because so many different actors are trying to keep the brake on that. If you look at the capabilities of the various actors, the Houthis will likely be able to fire some drones or missiles in the direction of Israel, but the numbers are going to be small.
And they've been contained at this point.
They've been contained. Hamas has been destroyed as a strategic threat. Lebanese Hezbollah is being focused upon with all that Israel's got. The Iraqis have only a limited type of capability, so they will fire drones and missiles. And Iran would have to fire missiles through an envelope of one of the most sophisticated air defense umbrellas the United States has ever established overseas with its aircraft carrier task force.
Norm, the United States is also preparing to send more assets to the region. Is that to send a signal to Iran?
Well, yes, it would also, depending on the nature of the assets, would help Israel with its air defense. We have an amphibious ready group in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is designed to assist with evacuation of citizens if necessary as one of its roles. Additional missile destroyers would assist in the broader air defense issue, and also having these aircraft carrier offensive capabilities would represent a powerful deterrent to Iran. Deterrent, but I don't think it's a guaranteed deterrent because I don't think the Iranians feel that the United States is interested in a ground war. And therefore, defense is one thing, pounding Iranian territory is another. And I think Iran might seek to test that. As time passes, it is likely we will see a growing threat of terrorism. Terrorist operations do not occur immediately. Terrorist operations require planning. They require bringing in weapons, personnel, surveillance of targets. This takes time to develop. And they can be frustrated or by either just a simple change of schedule of the target or by security and law enforcement forces around the world. I think Iran won't be deterred by our military and Hezbollah and others to conduct such terrorism, and we should be on the lookout for such activities.
Norm, what is the role of the United States, particularly, now? I know we have a massive role to play over time, but in the immediate sense, what is the role of Washington and what is the role of our European partners?
That's a pretty big question. And I tell you honestly, I don't know. I've been watching the region now for, gracious, more than 4 decades. In many ways, it is a contested region. I'm not sure what U.S. strategy is for the Middle East any longer. I'm not sure what the identity of the Middle East is at present. There is element of nationalism, failed states, failing states, fragile states, ossified states. And the United States wishes partnerships, but is not eager to be involved in conflict. Defense is not deterrence, which means conflicts occur. And if we're not going to play a role in those actions, then not only will adversaries listen to our don't and hear they might as well do, our friends will hear the same thing. I think the challenge for policymakers in the next administration is to define the strategic interest of the Middle East to the United States. And at one time, that was easy. And even aside from energy, It was keeping sea lanes open because they are the arteries of global trade. It was supporting moderate voices in Islam so that the worldwide Muslim community can confront militant Islam to prevent terrorism. It was to enjoy the ideas of the Middle East and incorporate them into our world. It was trade. But these all seem to have faded. I'm actually challenged to say what the U.S. policy in the region has been for some time.
Norm, let's talk about Hamas for a second. Hamas, while all the action is up north right now with Hezbollah, what's the status of Hamas right now? There was some confusion as to whether their leader, Yahya Sinwar, is actually alive or not. As of the recording of this podcast, we don't know. But what about Hamas? And, we're on, I think, 351 or 352 days of Israeli hostages remaining in captivity.
That's an important question because regarding Lebanon, the death of Sinwar and the collapse of Hamas leadership could create conditions in Gaza that allow the creation of an international security force with Arab participants, a reformed Palestinian Authority that would, even according to Washington's view, cause Hezbollah, the Houthis, and others to stop firing on Israel. I think in some ways there's been very little surprising about what has happened in Gaza. The conflict was going to be horrific for the population because Hamas practices not just human shield, but human sacrifice. The terrain is about the worst you can approach in a military campaign. Israel has significant intelligence and military capacities that Hamas does not. And over time, they would grind away at Hamas's military brigades, kill most of their leaders, eventually all of their leaders, and the group would be eradicated, leaving behind thousands of armed gunmen. I mean, that's been my sense for some months. I may even have said it on a previous episode of your excellent podcast. And I don't think there's a surprise there. But grinding away is not predictable, especially, and I realize the loss of Palestinian women and children it's a stain on our generation. It's a stain on Palestinian history that this was allowed.
Certainly.
As well. But it's unpredictable. And I'm not sure what we can do other than providing some basic technical support to the Israelis to assist their collection of intelligence, because ideally they want to find out where missiles are kept, where fighters are kept, where Sinwar is sitting, eradicate that or bring them to justice. And then we can move to this important next phase, which is, with hostages being freed, their families suffering coming to an end, try to put the Palestinian Authority or some reformed structure in a way that we can bring peace and some prosperity to this terrifically damaged generation of Palestinians.
Absolutely. Norm, as always, thanks so much for these insights today. I know we're going to have much more to talk about in the weeks and months to come. So thank you for being here.
Andrew, thank you for having me and for hosting one of the most insightful and important podcasts available. I certainly doubt I contributed much to that, to your reputation, but yours is an important podcast, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Well, it's very kind, Norm. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this podcast, check out our larger suite of CSIS podcasts. From Into Africa, The Asia Chessboard, China Power, AIDS 2020, The Trade Guys, Smart Women, Smart Power, and more. You can listen to them all on major streaming platforms like iTunes and Spotify. Visit csis.org/podcasts to see our full catalog.